3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Welcome to Mission Control, Peralta Design's podcast on all things branding and digital marketing. Since 2008, Peralta Design has launched hundreds of brands with award-winning identities and websites. Join our hosts Ramon and Jorge as they use decades of combined experience to tackle topics with past clients, industry partners, and the rest of the PD crew. At Peralta Design, we launch brands. But for now, let's launch right into this episode of Mission Control.
Hey everybody, welcome to Mission Control, where we respect the grind and reclaim the American dream. I am your host, Ramon Peralta with Peralta Design, and we launch brands. Today's guest is a blast from my past. He's someone who remembers the .com era. Okay, so he's got gray hairs. I'm just going to put that out there. True. And he's earned them. And the craziness that went along with it, vividly. We were colleagues from back in the days of Priceline.com, and he's a sports fan, a husband, a great dad. And by day, he's an account executive at MNI Targeted Media Inc., where customer-centric, brand agnostic campaigns start. Please help me welcome Mr. Matt McGuire.
Wow. I love it. Thanks very much, Ramon.
Welcome.
Very nice introduction. I appreciate it. I have to start off by saying, yes, this is my first podcast, but I'm having a flashback. I was a radio, whatchamacallit? What am I trying to say?
Announcer?
No.
Commentator?
Disc jockey.
DJ.
DJ, back in the day. Oh, my God. WSBU 88.3 FM in Olean, New York, St. Bonaventure University.
Nice.
A long time ago.
Nice. What kind of music?
Mostly
Pop?
Mostly rock,
yeah.
And so I just had a flashback. So
well, if you want to, do the call letters or whatever.
Disc jockey, yeah. DJ.
You had the professional name for it. But I thought you were going to say Shatner because I think you were involved in those radio spots back in the day of Priceline.
Yeah, I mean, that brings me back. Those were some seriously crazy days, that's for sure. 1999 in particular, that was nuts.
Man, so we're going to get there, but go back a little further. Tell us how you even got into advertising.
Sure, yeah. So I was a mass communications major at St. Bonaventure, and my father, he was in PR. He was a writer, and so there was a little bit of that influence for sure. As I get older, I think about getting back into, or really starting writing is something that's always kind of interested me. But really, that's where it all started. And first gig out of school, really just looking for a job in the streets of Manhattan.
Wandering the
streets of Manhattan, People are like, I'd love to hire you, but you don't have any experience. So how does that start? But I was lucky enough to start at Young and Rubicam, one of the large shops.
Big brand.
Yeah, in the city, and it was a great education for sure.
Yeah. And as a kid, what did you dream about? Because you're very tall. I figured you would have been an athlete of some sort.
Yeah.
What did you want to be as a kid?
I mean, who didn't want to be an athletic star, baseball star? I was a baseball player, I was a soccer player, but I have a whole new respect for athletes, especially in college, being able to, juggle a, athletic schedule and decent grades, which I couldn't do both. So I had to stay in school. So sports had to go.
Right. So, but did you have an affinity for marketing? Did you like TV commercials? Like, what drew you to advertising?
Yeah, I think radio was an influence for sure. But commercials, absolutely. TV commercials for sure. I did my thesis on beer advertising, actually, TV commercials, which I thought were...
Did you have to sample some?
Of course.
Research.
Of course, yeah. Lots of research. But, no, always interested in advertising from the get-go. And, I like I said, started at Young Rubicam just to see if that felt right, and it did.
Yeah.
Started in print.
What was that like in there? Was that like Mad Men?
Yeah, you know what?
Tell me some of those stories.
Yeah, so there were a lot of smoking in office space.
They have like
cubicles.
booze in the file cabinet.
You know what? The senior execs, they had it out on the table. I mean, they weren't shy about it. music playing, and there were booze. There was a lot of cigarettes, smoking. It was 1992, 93 when I started. So it was very commonplace back then. Yeah.
Well, that's a big, famous, the brand, everybody knows it in advertising. What were some of the accounts you worked on while you were there?
Bringing me back, it was a lot of CPG type stuff. I also like Jell-O and General Foods International Coffee. I don't even know if that exists anymore. A Xerox a little bit outside of CPG. So it was a lot of magazine work. A lot of newspaper, but mainly magazines. Print. And so I started to get a sense for the sales side because I was getting called on all the time from magazine sales representatives, understanding that side of the business as well.
Yeah. And when did you get into, were you managing accounts or were you trying to sell ad space in the magazines?
Yeah, I was managing accounts, kind of junior at that point in my career. But it was all about placing ads in magazines, negotiating contracts, the rates involved, positioning, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so from there, because this is 92, we didn't meet at Priceline till 98, 99.
Yeah.
So what came after Young and
So
Rubicon?
Jumped around a little bit. I was in newspapers for a little while for a newspaper buying operation. And then, it's interesting. Part of what I wanted to discuss today is really just, sticking with things. And sometimes you're going to hit some really, dark spots in your career, but you got to stick with it because you never know what's going to happen. Yeah. And from the newspaper company, I went to my first .com called Real Media, which really was at the time an online network of newspapers. Mm-hmm. So if people were interested in buying local content online, local newspapers online, Real Media was the first company, one of the first companies that did that sort of thing. That was 97, and the bottom fell out. Yeah. I lost my job. And then, what's kind of funny is that I found an ad in a newspaper for Walker Digital.
You sound like you're in your 50s at this point, by the way.
Yeah, well, exactly right. I'm just getting started. It's so true. Right.
I'm flipping through the Juan ads and all this.
Listen, newspapers haven't had a big part of my career for sure, but I saw an ad for Walker Digital, and the interview was like, we're talking about doing this thing, name your own price for airline tickets, and I was like, I'm in. Yeah. Sounds good to me.
Sounded crazy enough to give it a try.
That's 98. Yeah. 98. So.
Yeah. Man, that's where, I want you to take this wherever you want.
Sure.
Because you found yourself on the unemployed spot several times, but you've always bounced back. So there's a resiliency that I think is common throughout your career. But you've also, I remember you just always smiling, always laughing, always having a good time regardless. So there is something that's going on inside.
Sure.
That's kind of keeping you motivated throughout this. And do you want to expand on that a little?
Yeah. Again, so much of that is really true now more than ever. And I do want to talk about Priceline, but in general, being in sales, you have to have a positive outlook because so much of your job is rejection. It really is. It really is. It's because you have to understand that you're reaching out to people cold that may not have a need, or frankly are getting tired of getting called upon. And you really do have to take that with a grain of salt, understanding that that's just the reality. Because some of my proudest moments are, those few times that things do come together, and they turn into phenomenal relationships like any other job. But but let me take a step back and talk about Priceline, because you and I have had some fond memories there, and those were crazy days. We did a lot of great stuff, but what I wanted to bring up was, part of my responsibilities as director of advertising was, I was the dumping ground for every single vendor on earth that wanted a piece of Priceline. One thing that did come through that we ended up working on was working with like Wheel of Fortune in regards to providing promotional tickets for people to get onto the show or go to the show. And in return, we were getting like billboards, 10-second billboard mentions in between. We weren't doing TV ads back then. So for me, it was a really personal big deal. We were doing the radio spots with William Shatner, and that was fantastic. That led me to do a deal with Major League Soccer, which was kind of comical because even back then, Major League Soccer wasn't that big of a deal, and I don't know how much of a deal it is now, but it's definitely bigger.
It's bigger.
It's definitely bigger,
sure.
right? So anyway, fast forward, do you remember Rich Winarski?
Yes,
right?
I do.
So Rich and I and the gang from Ocean Media out in California, we went out to San Diego because we were the sponsors of the All-Star game. Priceline was representing I think the West Coast, or maybe it was the East Coast. Makes sense, would be the East Coast. And Pepsi was going to represent the West. So, all the names at the back of the jersey, Priceline.com.
It's a big deal.
Big deal. But more importantly, it was going to be on ABC television on like a Saturday, whatever it was, 30-second spot. It was going to be our first TV spot before the real stuff started. So for me, again, personally,
this is a huge turning point in the life of a startup because you're on radio, you're on the internet, but now to go into like mainstream sports and TV. It's
exactly.
Huge. Prime time.
And I'm asking, production resources of putting an ad together that we really don't have the story yet of Shatner on TV and all this other stuff. So anyway, we sit down to watch the game. You probably don't remember this. I told you a story a long time ago. And the president of Ocean Media, Mike Robertson, he looks at the Jumbotron and he kind of sighs and takes out his cell phone out of his jacket, calls his wife at home and says, honey, put on Channel 7, put on the game. He goes, what? And he shuts the phone. He stands up.
Oh, man.
And he goes, we're leaving. I said, what do you mean we're leaving? The game hasn't even started. He goes, John F. Kennedy Jr. just crashed his plane.
Oh, my God.
And I forget which island. It was like
Block Island.
Block Island. Block Island. All the news have taken over. There will be no airing of this game on ABC. It's been pushed to like ESPN2 or something like that.
Which
he's
nobody's going to watch.
Right. So I was like, he's like, we're leaving. I'm like, what do you mean we're leaving? Where are we going? He goes, we're going to Mexico. So we drove to Mexico, which we were in San Diego, wasn't too far, and had some drinks,
4 miles, 5 miles.
Lobster tacos and whatever else, and made an afternoon of it. But
some debauchery in Tijuana or anything. we won't go there.
No. But anyway, that's one of many, many stories. But Priceline, what a wild ride for sure.
Do you remember, because from what I recall, Shatner, this was a moment where Shatner was off the radar.
Yeah.
There was issues
Third
with
Rock from the
with
Sun
his
was
wife
his biggest deal.
Yeah, this was before Miss Congeniality. I think.
Oh yeah.
I think he got that because of the commercials for Priceline where he was singing and all this, but he wasn't doing much.
No,
when you guys approached him, you got him cheap. I think in the beginning.
I don't know how low he was on the list,
right?
But there were a lot of names above his. But listen, it was a blessing in disguise.
All right, I guess we got to call Shatner.
You said it, I did it. So. No. But no, it was a blessing in disguise, and I think with William Shatner and the amount of radio we were buying, he was very polarizing. Kind of like Trump. I mean, people either loved him or they hated him.
Right.
Either way, it didn't matter. People were talking about it. And they were talking about Priceline.
It was a weird, perfect storm because putting him, to sing, and then the timing of it all, and then the way he looked. I remember him just being super bloated. I think he cleaned up a little after, but he wasn't really ready for to be on air at any point. But all of a sudden, he's in these spots. And I just think it worked. It was
genius, actually.
It was very genius.
Because people knew the voice.
Exactly.
People knew the voice, so it just kind of took off from there. And frankly, Priceline had a very unique product.
Yeah, it did.
I don't know if you recall, but there were many companies, Bill Gates included, that came after Priceline because they thought they could
mimic and all these other,
they can mimic the brand with their own product, and Jay Walker would have, he wouldn't have anything to do with it. So we had to fight a lot of fights, but won most of them. And look at them now. I mean, they're humongous.
They're humongous. Booking is now their.
They own Kayak, I believe, and others too. So
it's amazing. It's an amazing testament that it's still part of my personal brand story because it's still around.
Yeah.
And so people still recognize the brand. So whenever I say, I was senior art director and in the early days of Priceline, it's it gets their attention.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I remember being in the hallway, my desk was literally in the hallway and CBS News coming in one day and everybody having to stop what they were doing and start painting the walls because we had to clean up for this news crew. It was that kind of environment. People were sleeping there.
Yep.
Even well into my years there at Walker, Jay would be in there on a Saturday morning putting hours in. He was one of the hardest working guys and definitely influenced me in just the work ethic.
Oh yeah.
Like just pushing and not being satisfied. Like, you'd present something that you thought was like great,
Right.
and it still wasn't good enough for what he had in mind.
Yeah.
So he always kind of pushed everyone to be better, to be greater,
How
think bigger.
How great was his office?
Amazing. I try to emulate that, except I have like die-cast cars and things. But
you're missing a 6-foot predator outside
I don't
your
have
office.
the 50 million year old fossil.
Yeah, a couple things.
But I'm getting there.
You got time.
I have a Giants helmet.
Yeah.
That's the best I can do. Oh my God! But yeah, those were wild times. And then take us, because we all had careers after that. So now, what happens to Matt McGuire after that?
Yeah. So I from Priceline, I started to dabble in sales.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, that's really where my character, as you mentioned, yes, I typically have a positive outlook in everything that I do, because I think that's really a healthy way to go about life in general.
Good advice.
But I'll never forget my first sales call where, it was a cold call. I reached out and the guy literally barked at me at the phone, and I kind of laughed just a little bit. I'm like, hey, man. It's like, it's all good. No worries. I hung up and I laughed to myself like, Jesus, this is going to happen. But I think there are a lot of people who would have been like, oh my God, I want nothing to do with this. And
defeated. Yeah,
defeated. Exactly. And you have to understand that it's all timing, like everything. Mm-hmm. Everything is timing. So, from there, it's funny. I actually did return to the newspaper space for another newspaper buying operation. But they started to build out an online newspaper network. So I was traveling around Midwest. And I actually started to go pretty far out to the West Coast as well. Selling not only our technology of helping ad agencies for the most part with a database of newspapers. So when people are like, oh my God, I got to advertise in newspapers, I don't know where to begin. Yeah. We had a database, a user tool, if you will, that allowed them to pull markets and the newspapers involved and the costs and the newspaper sizes quickly. Yeah. And then we started to do that with online newspapers. And at the time, Centro, which is now Basis, Centro was the online newspaper network back then, just starting out. People in my company were like, we really should buy them, that kind of a thing. And just because we were backed by a company in Europe, but that never happened. But anyway, that aside, just dealing in sales. And from that organization, I'll never forget, I was calling on an ad agency in Chicago for 3 years straight. I might have booked 1 or 2 campaigns, $20,000, whatever it may be, nothing, but he was a super nice guy. And we always had a, good time catching up over lunches and everything else. 3 years in, he called me one day and he said, I think I finally have something for you. Wow. They had won a pharma account, and the pharma account had a drug that basically, their competitor, I should say, ran into some legal trouble. And the legal trouble is that, may or may not cause a heart attack. I want to get into the brands and things like that. Yeah. So his brand was kind of like, listen, we want to tell the world we don't have that problem. We don't, you should
That's
use
our
us,
competitive advantage. Right? You won't die.
Exactly. So he said, I think I finally have something for you.
Oh, geez.
It ended up being the single largest campaign, second largest, I think, in the company's history, but it was like $10 million, newspapers. The point of telling that story is that relationship building, never burning bridges, and frankly, let's face it.
And genuine relationship building, because
Absolutely.
3 years, you're not, to invest that much time, you genuinely care about each other.
Absolutely.
You like hanging out with each other.
You get to know each other.
You're not like, hey, can we get a sale today?
Exactly.
The conversation doesn't end on like, so that's fine, and I'm glad everybody's doing well, but what do you got for me? It can't be, because it won't last 3 years.
Well, it doesn't work that way.
No, it can't.
And people who think that way don't last in the business. So, it was a moment I wish I had more $10 million moments. Right. Those are few and far between. But the point is that you never want to burn bridges. Right. And just as important, if not more important, is like, you don't know where those people are going to go. Right. They may not stay at the same company. Right. And with the power of tools like LinkedIn, which I think, is one of the best tools out there, connecting with people and, congratulating them as they move on with their careers and you and I continue this conversation.
Yeah.
It's really, really important.
It is.
Because, again, you may need somebody down the road and vice versa.
Yeah, and I love how we just picked up where we left off after,
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time, and it's just nice to see you still prospering and the family doing well, and
you too,
and all that. It's really cool. So let's get into MNI, because I want to fully understand. We're all guilty in our industry of using all these buzzwords, and then it doesn't mean anything to like the layman. You know, it's like, so brand agnostic, customer-centric, targeted media, like
fancy words.
Yeah, like they're expensive too.
Yeah, they can be. They can be.
Explain to our listeners, especially since we have entrepreneurs and business owners. I love what you said about just the attitude of the right kind of outlook to have as a salesman. But from a practical standpoint, what do you do, and like on a day-to-day, an average day, how do you help companies, expand and grow sales?
So I've been with MNI just over a decade now. I did leave for a heartbeat. I'll just say grass is not always greener, and I came back. So the reason why I came to MNI, and again, for any salesperson out there, is that you want to be able to represent something or sell something that, frankly, is unique or somewhat different. Because it's really, really difficult to sell something that's a commodity, and everybody has the same widget. And digital advertising, which is a large part of our business, is just that, to be clear. But 10 years ago, when I first started, I think one of the most unique things about MNI Targeted Media, first of all, they're over 50 years old, and they have had a relationship with magazines. They were first owned by Time Inc. Time Inc. got bought out by Meredith Corp. And then just about, has it been a couple months already? We were just bought out. Meredith was bought out by IAC, Barry Diller's company, Dotdash. Okay. So they ran a full-page ad in some of the national newspapers. We've basically become the single largest publisher in the United States. I don't know about the world, but so representing magazines like People and Good Housekeeping, but also many online brands as well that are coming over from the Dotdash side. But to answer your question more succinctly, the reason why I went, and what's so interesting to me about MNI from a print standpoint, is that they give advertisers, especially at the local level, the ability to take national magazines, group them together by lifestyle, so food or business or health or whatever it may be, news, but run them locally. So if there's a client that is interested in running in just the New York DMA, we typically don't get smaller than that, like the DMA or market MSA size. There are some publications where we have enough circ, like like a Time magazine as an example, or a Sports Illustrated, where we can get down to the county level. But in most cases, we're perfect. And I'll give you a brand that everybody knows that I've run with before. It's been a while. But Nestle Waters, really what Nestle Waters are, they're regional water brands. They have waters all over the country. So many moons ago, when I first started MNI, I was flipping through a national magazine, and I saw one of their ads, and I'm like, well, they're not buying through me. And I know Nestle is right in Stamford, Nestle Waters was. So I would just basically send them packages of MNI, media kit material and stuff like that, explaining, email, blah, blah, blah. A couple months went by, and I didn't hear from the client. I heard from their agency, and they basically said, we've been getting your packages, and we should probably talk. But the point in telling that story is that, we ran a campaign for them for one of their West Coast regional water brands, California, some other markets, because they were wasting circulation outside of their footprint. So that's kind of it's basically full page ads inside the magazines. It's typically, so if you run in 3 food magazines, it's typically the same ad, running in all 3 magazines in the markets that your client needs to be in. Maybe it's a food product that's having a rollout. Maybe it's a new product from the UK that's not ready to go national. We're a good fit for that.
For example, it's a tortilla, so it's regional, and they're going to.
Restaurants. It could be a local.
It's a
regional
chain that's only like in the South, like Metro.
It could be in Northeast. It could be Connecticut, Boston. That kind of a thing. So.
I love that concept because you leverage. You get somebody into a big brand magazine. You
Yeah.
know, like if you're listed,
That's why they love it.
If you're in a People's magazine,
Exactly.
this
Good
has-
housekeeping.
right.
Yeah.
You're leveraging
Travel
that.
and leisure. Right. Yeah. So then, and I'll try to move this along, but we also have a cover wrap on the print side, which gives you the ability
That's cool.
to wrap 4 pages of content around, let's say, Fortune magazine. And it's more of a B2B play. It can be B2C. But let's say you're trying to reach business professionals, and this gets really small, hyper small.
That's hyper small because you don't find the wraps on the newsstand.
Correct.
You find them on the subscriptions
and
to the offices, or more like direct to the reader.
Exactly, and it doesn't have to be subscriber based. In
Okay.
other words, if the person isn't receiving Fortune magazine, that doesn't matter.
Got it.
We use various databases that say, okay, we're trying to reach small business owners who have less than 50 employees who are in the IT space, right? We can wrap 4 pages of content around Fortune magazine as a really good example and send it to the CEOs of those companies only. So now, again, you made the joke before. It's true. It can get pricey. There's no, 4 pages of content, around a magazine. Now the quantity can be quite small. A couple thousand people is kind of the minimum. So those are the print products, and then digital has obviously taken over, right? In my last 10 years, our revenue vastly has moved towards the digital side of the business because that's where the world is going. Print is still a huge part of our business, but we have our own, programmatic platform to be able to buy over 99% of the inventory that exists out there. But we have the ability to do search and social and native and video, streaming audio. We were just talking about that before, and it's constantly changing. So we on the digital side of things, we work with ad agencies where if they're not built to do it themselves, we can kind of serve as their in-house partner for various aspects. But the ideal situation for me is the client direct relationship, especially with an emerging brand that hasn't reached out to ad agencies yet. And we're unique in that way because we're not a traditional ad agency in the sense that we don't have traditional agency fees. We don't have billable hours. We make our money based on the media that you run. So the CPM includes our fees, for each placement. And the goal is to, I'm a direct response guy at heart. The goal is to make sure the media performs so that you come back and do more.
Yeah, so you're doing forecasting for them and giving them a sense of reach based on spend. And what you're saying is any of the ancillary services are kind of rolled in because
Correct.
You may be providing some traditional agency services, like maybe content creation or layout and stuff like that, or no?
We typically stay away from the creative, and it's interesting. I learned this a long time ago. I give you a lot of credit for the work that you do, but let's face it, creative is very subjective.
Yes. Right?
So if you as an agency, and this goes back to even Priceline days when we were working with Ocean Media, I still don't think they do creative. And Mike Robertson, taught me that too. It's like, it is very subjective. So if the creative sucks, right, and you've got the greatest media plan on earth, it doesn't matter. Right. It's going to bomb, right?
And then you can just be like, they did it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
so, it's just, so people are like, oh, do you do creative? No, we don't do it. But that I feel that it's.
Whereas we're going to argue on the other side. We're going to be like,
it's the media's fault.
It's the media's fault.
It didn't perform.
They didn't put it in front of the right people.
Yeah, so, and you know what, that, honestly, that's the blessing and curse of digital media. Is that you can track it.
Exactly.
As great
Who
as
saw it?
As great as it is, like, you have clients out there that are watching every day.
Yeah.
Like, I got 5 clicks yesterday, and the day before I had 100. What's going on? It's like, well, you got to give it time to breathe and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, we have a call today with a client where we launched something new for them, an entirely new product.
Right.
But they're kind of focused on the follower growth, and it's like, well, it's hard to grow followers on something that we haven't quite defined yet. Yeah. We just launched it. Now that we've established what it is, now we can focus on followers. But sometimes our clients can get focused kind of on the wrong things.
Absolutely.
Especially when it's something new.
Yes. And again, taking a step back and talking about the role of a salesman. Yeah. And me and my gray hair, I've been doing this a long time. What you realize...
You're like the silver fox now.
Thank you. I'll go with that. What I've come to know and realize, over time is that patience is the game, and frankly, telling your clients right up front when they say, okay, I want to do this, and I've got $5,000. no is the answer.
Right.
But more importantly, educating them on what it takes.
And the expectations.
Managing expectations is the game. And what I just explained to your producer earlier. Francisco, sorry.
Let's hear a sound effect or two. What do you got there for
You got anything for us?
Yeah.
There you go.
There he is.
Is that, I'm dealing with a new vendor, a new technology right now in the streaming audio space. And I get a little nervous sometimes because if we don't have a lot of experience with them.
Well, I was going to ask you that. That was in my mind, and I'm glad you brought it up, is that, you're not a spring chicken. You've got years and years of experience, but you mentioned how the technology is changing fast. And then as a salesman, you've got to understand what's available so you can sell it. So how have you kind of stayed on top of your game over the years?
Sorry, my phone was just buzzing at the same time. Rephrase that again, if you don't mind.
How have you stayed on top of all the latest technologies in your space? Because in order to sell it, you've got to be able to understand it.
Yep. So one of the best things that MNI Targeted Media has going for it is the digital team is wonderful, but there's one person in particular that her job, for the most part, I know she does a lot of things, but one of the things that she does, and the salespeople obviously love it, is that she vets new partners every year. And it's really about what is cutting edge, what is the latest and greatest, because to your point, we better stay on top, right? Because the clients keep asking us for X, Y, Z. And so this woman, she does a phenomenal job. She's been with the company a long time. And I used to make the joke pre-COVID that the staff at MNI eats very well, right? Because there are new vendors in every day educating the digital team on the latest and greatest.
And what are they literally bringing bagels in and stuff like that?
Oh, you name it. I mean, the lunches are ridiculous.
That's old school,
The lunches are ridiculous. I mean, sushi and you know what, but you name it. But anyway, and at the end of the year, for lack of a better way of explaining it, she basically, with the senior people on the digital team, I guess, make a decision on who we're going to go with the following year. And that information is provided to the sales team at our national sales meeting. Again, this was pre-COVID. We're still doing that. It's just a little different now. And it's great because from a sales perspective, you're selling the same stuff all the time. It's like, well, what else do we got? Because some of the stuff's getting stale. And having new technology out there and trying to stay on top of it so that you look that much more impressive to your clients is important.
Yeah. Speaking of COVID, and I like some of this to be evergreen, and I think it is, but what kind of challenges or changes took place in your day-to-day that you think are going to kind of stick with you going forward?
Well, I hope a lot of it doesn't stick. I'm one of the, I shouldn't say I'm one of the few, but I'm of the mindset that, working from home, especially in a sales position, has been really, really hard. I firmly believe that there's a lot of managing of accounts going on out there, and not just by salespeople, but by the ad agency people too. I mean, I wonder how much is going on in regards to people trying to push the envelope, find new stuff, clients reaching out and wanting to spend more money. I think a lot of people are holding their cards close to the vest, in every sense of the word. And again, for during the 2 years now almost of COVID,
going on 3.
I mean, I think there are industries that actually did really, really well. The Home Depot, the do-it-yourselfers, brands and companies within that space. They did, CPG brands, certain food products also did it because, again, people, were home. But the home industry in general, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but myself, we've done some work. But for the most part, everybody's doing something at home because they weren't going away. They weren't traveling.
The vacations weren't there.
Well, that's the flip side,
so
right?
So it was like we got to hook up the yard and the house.
Right. So to answer your specific question, what's going to stick? And I don't think this is necessarily a good thing, but I get why. Friend of mine in the industry was on a flight like 6 months ago, maybe not 6 months ago, 4 months ago, whatever it was, sat next to a pilot who was, just jumping a ride basically from point A to point B. And he asked him, he said, my buddy asked the pilot, how's it going? He said, it's not good. And he goes, and frankly, they don't see business travel coming back the way it used to be because companies have figured out, hey, if I can do this on a Zoom call, and the days of the guy flying to New York to Chicago for one meeting may be gone forever kind of a thing. Now, I get it. It makes sense. But working from home and doing everything through a box, WebEx and Zoom calls and everything else, I understand it. But as a culture, I don't think it's healthy.
Yeah.
I don't think it's healthy. So we'll see what happens. I'm hopeful that 2022 things are going to slowly start to change and people will get back to their offices. And the only meetings I'm having in person, they're at sporting events or that's pretty much it. Because people don't get out a lot and they're like, oh yeah, you want to go do that, sure, but just getting lunch. It doesn't happen too often.
You're not going to any Giants games, are you?
Not this year. I'm a Jet fan, which is even worse.
No.
But they're New York in general.
I know.
I'm a Met
brutal.
fan too, which is I'm very excited just because.
But Jorge is big on the Mets, and he's optimistic. I guess they're doing a lot of changes.
Well, it's because
the culture.
It's the owner.
The owner is trying to change the culture.
We ended up getting a billionaire owner.
Yeah.
He's probably the wealthiest owner. I shouldn't say all sports, but certainly baseball.
Yeah.
So I think I'll say it on this podcast. The Mets are taking over New York.
We'll see about that. Hey man, so what's the best way to paint a picture of that ideal client out there and that you could help and what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, I mean, listen, large or small, it doesn't matter. It's really about building businesses, right? And whoever their consumers are that they're trying to reach, that's what we do best is basically trying to, target a client's audience through various forms of print and digital media, but with a lot of data and with a lot of research, we can do it really, really well. So again, from the local, mom and pop, I've worked with companies that own wedding venues, in Westchester County, New York, to as large as massive telecommunication companies. So it's really just, you can email me, you can call me, and it's really just to have a discussion about who their audience is and what are their goals, so that we can have an honest discussion about how potentially those goals can be met. And I meant when I said before, I'm a direct response guy at heart, which means test. Yeah. And if it proves itself, start small, and then you build on it.
Right. Give us your email address and your phone number.
Matt.McGuire at MNI.com. And the cell, because there is no office right now, it's 203-212-7633.
Awesome. And what word of advice would you give for that salesman out there? Because we're all in sales, small business owners, entrepreneurs. Even if you're on your career path, you're selling, what you can do. So you've been through it, and you're very resilient. So what can you say?
And listen, it's not just, it's my whole career as we started this conversation, but it's really having a positive attitude. Expect to take a couple punches, because that's just the game. It's what's the Rocky phrase exactly? It's life throwing you punches. It's a question of how you get back up and all that stuff. It's true. You got to roll with the punches, and if you build those relationships, I guarantee you something good will happen. You just have to stick with it. That's the truth.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for being on our show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great job. I think you got a new career here for your first podcast. We're going to pull you back.
Maybe the evolution of a disc jockey.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to this episode of Mission Control. Until next time, this is Ramon Peralta with Peralta Design, and we launch brands.
Thank you for taking this journey with us. To learn more about Peralta Design and our work, go to www.peraltadesign.com and subscribe to keep up with the crew.